I started at the National Cancer Institute June 10th, 1980, as a natural products chemist. So from the time my grandfather got sick with cancer, when I was probably 12, 1970, right before the Cancer Institute was founded, but and the war was declared.
The war on cancer from President Nixon.
Correct. Right before that, he got lung cancer. And everybody said it was from smoking cigarettes, which of course were filtered and things like that.
Yeah.
But years later, we realized that, and we all know that tobacco doesn't cause cigarettes. It's the or cause cancer. It's the filters. It's the poisons on tobaccos. It's not our plants.
That's what I've always wondered about with that particular thing.
That's true. And what was even more that I only know all of this now. In the last decade of my journey and seeing the overall corruption where we can't use food as medicine.
Right.
So essentially I just thought right then cancer was a closet disease. They didn't tell him. They didn't tell the relatives. They didn't, and this is all told in one of our books. We have Plague of Corruption, and Ending Plague now, which came out about a month ago. So how do we end plague is to go back and once you see how you've been deceived, once you see how you've been tricked and how you've been led there, because of your own sin of giving up your own freedoms and not thinking and casting judgment and unforgiveness on people who had a different, we were all called crazy. So if you had a different viewpoint and it's not progress, it's not a microwave oven, it's not, whatever it is you're thinking of, and then you can only realize how everything came in to destroy everything about our world. And so starting in, so my grandfather got lung cancer. Everybody blamed him. He smoked cigarettes. Of course, he died a short time later. Chemotherapies and the whole thing, just like we know now. So I immediately thought the first book I picked up was Linus Pauling in Vitamin C and Cancer. And so I have 2 copies of those now. Somebody gave me one, and I found one that in a yard sale that was actually autographed. So from the time I was 12 or 13 years old, all I ever wanted to do was use food as medicine and heal cancer and prevent cancer from plants, from medicine. We're Native Americans, we're Cherokee. My mother's, my grandfather's side, grandfather who died. They're Cherokee Indians, and all the relatives lived to 102 and things, and where the Cherokees, before they killed them, of course, in the Trail of Tears, when they took their guns, put smallpox on their blanket. So I come by this, through my heritage, through the generations of how we treat food as medicine. So
That's I went to interesting and valuable.
Yeah, I went to University of Virginia. Got a degree in chemistry with a specialization in biology because there was no such thing as biochemistry. You couldn't get a degree program. So 1976 through 80 is when I was at University of Virginia. So the biology was fine with me. It was plants. And so plants is medicine. I went, there was, and some of this is in my talk later today, so you can look through all that. So, interferon. Cover of Time magazine, March 31st, 1980. Graduated a couple months later. Didn't get in medical school because of misogyny, so we'll just go on from there. There were gatekeepers even then, which all these stories are told in Ending Plague. Because if we see it, and we don't allow it to happen again, and we stop it now, then every person can realize how we've been deceived in every aspect of our life.
I want to pick up that book right away. So
Ending Plague. You can get it for your audience at thegreatawakeningbooks.com, thegreatawakeningbooks.com. And we've had an entrepreneur actually called me because of the censorship. Even as New York Times best-selling authors, that requires airports, other places to have the New York Times best-selling authors' books, the next ones, come out on the new releases on the various tables. And you can't go to any Barnes & Noble or anybody like that. You can't go there and find our books anywhere. If I go to a store in Ventura where I live, they say, oh yeah, it's on the list, we'll see it soon. And that was a month and a half ago. So everything they do, and we're like, order it. Order it in and get it in the store, order 10 copies. And they said, no, we'll order 10 copies and we'll send it to your house. But we won't order 10 copies and sell it. As
this
a local
is really
author.
critical, and your story is full of this as an example.
Mm-hmm.
But people need to understand that critical health information
is being kept
completely censored. And I've had discussions, sometimes heated, with people on social media and in private, about, well, you're crazy, that's just conspiracy theory, you don't know what you're talking about. What about all those doctors and scientists who say otherwise? I want you to understand, and I know you understand this, that we take in all the same information that the rest of the world does, because we can't avoid it. It's everywhere. It's on when I go to the gym, it's up on the TV screen. It's everywhere. What we need to understand is that the real truth is completely hidden.
Right, which is why we're here.
Look for it.
Which is why we're here at The Truth About Cancer.
Yeah.
So here, from my very beginnings, from 10 years, 12 years old, it was always food is medicine, heal it. So there has to be environmental causes. I went to the National Cancer Institute. I started in fermentation chemistry. What is that?
Wow.
I'm fermenting. I'm growing cell lines. I'm making interferon. That was my very first job. Interviewed through the Washington Post and got the job. She started June 10th, 1980, and worked there for them in a capacity from an entry-level technician until in 1999 I was appointed to lead the lab of antiviral drug mechanisms.
Yes.
How do drugs change your immune system to fight cancer, like interferon? And you use them together with food, because interferon is a biological response modifier. So, so you're looking at other animals and other plants as food, as God said.
Yeah.
So we were talking earlier about eggs in a grocery store.
Yes.
And so my new friend, Dr. Robert O. Young, who's also been persecuted, says one of the most toxic things you can eat is an egg yolk. But in an egg. So what did we do in the 80s? Well, we started making egg whites and vilifying egg yolks. Well, egg yolks are the seed. God made everything in Genesis, plants and animals for food.
Yes.
For food. But our food is contaminated, because now what we know is when you put eggs in a grocery store, in order to be in a grocery store, they dip them in chlorines. Yeah. And when you dip them in chlorine, you break the seed, the shell that keeps the pathogens out. And that's why you have to put them in the refrigerator. If you just wash the outside with soap and water, you can leave that on your countertop for weeks. And
we raised chickens. We raised most of our own food for about 27 years. And I didn't wash my eggs.
Right.
Now I get my eggs, pastured eggs, like what we raised from my daughter, and they get table scraps and non-GMO unsprayed seed mixtures and fish meal. Not always fish meal, and that's not always a good thing. But yes, we don't wash unless they're really dirty.
Right. Well, and we're just not using, and some of the problem with even everything, carrots, things, root vegetables, they're not bad. It's just that our soil is contaminated. So I don't eat carrots because our soil is contaminated, but I need carotenoids, and I need them as they are in nature. So I knew from so I started working with Dr. Frank Rossetti June 6, 1983, in the Biological Response Modifiers program. And it was a translational research institute. We used hyperbaric oxygen therapy, we used ozone therapy, for cancer, AIDS, we used interferon therapy, Candace Pert made peptide T. All of these things are in Ending Plague, so that you can see the walkthrough. The first half is Dr. Frank Rossetti telling the story for the first time, because that captures Criminal Gallo, Fauci. We've got to show America this has been going on a long time. And so now we need to go back and fix it, because our soil is depleted of minerals. But what that does, just like our bodies are, but and our soil's depleted of minerals. But that what it does is it depletes the soil of the diversity of microorganisms
Yes.
that would normally be giving. Remember in pandemic when I said the beaches are closed and that's where we get our
Yes,
immunity,
I
because
remember
we
that.
get boosted when you walk and everybody's laughing at me. Well, what do? We walk in the salt water. We
Yeah.
walk in the salt water, and the salt in the minerals and the sequences in the sand.
Yes.
And I guarantee you, if the dogs pee in the sand, there's going to be a lot of coronaviruses. So you're going to be getting boosters of the
Yes.
coronavirus family. So regardless of where these weaponized things come from,
Yeah.
if we just nourish our God-given immune system, we win. But how do you do that?
Exactly. I love
when-
just
but
the way you put that.
But how do we do it when everything's contaminated? So we have to wake people up, because when they do this, when you do the, everybody's saying, well, let's just say, vitamin C, for example. Well, there's scorbate and there's forms, and they put them in pills, and then the pills has filler, and those are toxic. And so taking it is not as good as ingesting it. And now we have to make clean supplements because everything's contaminated in the way we're making things. So I started at the NCI between 1980 and 1983, making plants as medicine. Adriamycin is a cancer drug. It's called the red devil because it was a red plant. And I made and the icins is their antimicrobial. So remember, adriamycin. I made one called toyocamycin, sangivamycin. And what they do is the icins, they're antibiotics, but they're actually, now that we know we have a microbiome, they modulate the microbiome. And so then in 2004, when Dr. Carrie Madej was showing Craig Venter as being an evil guy. But the sequencing of the genome gave us information that we could use, and they didn't want us to see. So they used it as fast as they can to twist the knowledge.
Yeah.
And these are of the virum. And so that's what I'll talk about this afternoon, so I won't go into it. So we have an endogenous virum. And so it's very important to know that these are God-given. And
Yes.
I'll discuss it. It's not ancient, we didn't evolve, and there's one slide that I'll have to spend a bit of time on. Because the slide is showing you how the scientific literature is just literally propaganda and criminal fraud. And that was the biggest thing in my story. That was the thing, because scientists are so trusting of fact. Yes, the news, would you believe the Washington Post? Would you believe that the banks are corrupt? Would you believe the journalists are corrupt? Would you believe the government is corrupt, Wall Street corrupt? But would you believe that a doctor and a journal would knowingly inject a child with poison, knowing the journal was correct? No.
And that David Wolf's story the other night was, it alluded to that. He more than touched on that he as a young child understood when his parents were trying to inject him.
Yes.
That wasn't good, and he wanted nothing to do with it.
Right.
We have to listen to God, and God gives us sense. We have to stop looking at doctors and scientists and
As
government
God.
officials as God.
As God.
And man, have we done that.
Yeah, and so now we have to step back, but we have to do so in a way, and that's why when I sign our book, Plague of Corruption, because it reads like prophecy. Like prophecy. I didn't say we're prophets. I said it reads like prophecy. How did we know? And this is what Mickey Willis showed us yesterday.
Yeah.
How did we know? Because God puts us in places with people. But if we don't talk to them, and we don't speak the truth in love, and we're vilified. So what has all of science ever said about me in the 10 years, in the 3 books? It had to make us bad.
Yes.
And it had to, in order that people would just discount us without ever looking. So first, we as Christians have to, forgive people, but look at the data, and don't think the name calling of you is how God sees you. And that's the hardest point to see, because what happens if you do that, then you won't read the papers where the bad guys are telling you what you did right. You know, there was one paper in AIDS Research in Human Retroviruses, and I had it in a talk I gave a few weeks ago, but I didn't put it in this one today for time constraints. But it's interesting because it says, and this is a real sciencey talk, I'm going to give people are going to really see it today. It's new data, it's new publications, and it starts to show you how we've been deceived, and it's criminal fraud.
I absolutely
needs to go away.
agree.
So,
Yeah.
but in that paper, the title, it was AIDS Research in Human Retroviruses. I believe it was July 2020. Plandemic came out May 4th, the first one.
Yeah.
The second one, Indoctrination, didn't come out until August 18th. So May 4th, 2020, Plandemic comes out. And it's a promotional video for, Plague of Corruption in its inception, when Dr. Lori first proposed to Mickey, as you heard yesterday.
Yeah.
So you can read his book, Plandemic, 100%, censored.
Oh yeah, I remember how difficult it was to watch the first Plandemic when it came out.
Sure.
But I saw the whole thing, and I shared it with others.
Yeah.
And when we're trying to do that, unfortunately, we have to share this information right now in sort of a subversive way.
Sure.
We can't put it up on Facebook in a post because Facebook blocks it.
Right.
There are things we can do.
Well, we're starting Brighteon and other things. So just
Yeah.
even sitting here, this is why the importance of live conferences.
Yes.
Keep us apart, and you still see me as non-human. You still
Yeah.
see me as, and I don't see myself as a victim. I see myself as a victor, and through faith, through abiding, I sign Plague of Corruption, Psalm 91. It's the only psalm in the Bible that comes with a prerequisite. That is, abide in Him.
Yep.
Abide in Jesus. And when you do that, you will emerge as the victor
That
and
is a
not
wonderful.
the victim.
Yep.
And that's the story I'm going to show today, because I just start with the titles of the book.
I'm
And
eager
so-
to hear your talk this
yeah.
afternoon. You're definitely on my schedule.
Yeah.
And I hope we can talk again another time and get some
sure.
more, maybe a webinar or something if you're
Oh,
up
sure.
to that.
Always.
Your whole story, of course, can't be told in 5 or 10 minutes, and it is incredible. And I have nothing but the utmost respect, admiration, and gratitude to you for standing up against the evil corruption. And I agree, it is totally evil, and it's got to stop. But it's not going to stop until we stop it.
Yeah, and things like, God's kitchen. That's what we need to know. And but we need to really look at it like we've done with the egg and the yolk, and realize, plastic food isn't food.
No.
Glyphosate is destroying our environment. So I won't be able to go to all those things today, but we can drill down. We do a little cannabinoids. We do. So it's not, the idea is that it's not that medicine is bad. It's that we haven't used it properly. God gives us the ability to make medicine, be healers, medicine men, taking plants, making them as medicine, using them in combination with food. That's what I'm going to show you today. And modulate that immune response. We're supposed to live 120 years, as in Genesis. My great Aunt Susie lived 102 years. My grandmother lived 94 years. We are killing America now. For maybe 3 years ago, I told Dr. Rossetti, who's got a 35-year-old son, I basically told him, or 30-year-old son, whatever, something like that, and he's 75 or 78. And I said, your son will be the first generation that doesn't outlive us. And I was actually, and as if that were a horrible thing, and I was wrong. How was I wrong? Oh no, it's the 50-year-olds that aren't living out early, and the 80-year-olds. We had kids late. The 35-year-olds are dying at 32. We just lost my daughter-in-law and her mother is 68 years old, not 78 years old. It's a crisis in our world, and we have to wake people up. But if we don't speak that truth in love and forgive each other, we've got to forgive each other. We were all deceived, whether we be scientists. And so a scholar's obligation is to admit their sin and their deceit, and produce that knowledge, and then communicate that knowledge and honor God. Turn and repent. We have to change our minds. The mark of the beast isn't here in the arm. The mark of the beast isn't that needle. And I hope to convince people that never again do we get a needle. Ever. because that's not of God. We've bypassed our mucosal immunity. We bypass food as medicine. We're directly creating an imbalance in our basic innate immune system. That's what tells you self from non-self. And so that's what food needs to do for you. That's what the appropriate exposure of sunlight. You don't put parabens and whatever we've been putting on and calling it sunscreen.
Yeah.
Essential oil's fine. That's what I do.
And I actually,
don't
when I started eating a lot more fat, saturated fat, I rarely get a sunburn. If I get a sunburn, it's just a little. It gets pink.
Right. When I get carotenoids.
Yeah.
Because it's very important to get that skull and get that conversion of vitamin D. I don't like to ingest a lot of supplements, and I don't. I think about healthy living.
I'm with you. I'm careful about that as well. Yeah.
So.
Well, very good. Thank you, Judy. I can't wait to hear your talk this afternoon.
Okay, great.
And I'll tell more about it later.
Okay.
Probably write about it. So thank you.
Thank you, and we'll see you.